Welcome, everyone. While we wait for more participants to flow onto the platform, on screen is the ERIS content disclaimer. The webinar will be recorded and available on the website in the next few days. I would also like to mention that there will be time dedicated for questions and answers with the panelists after the presentation. Please enter any questions you have in the Q&A section of the platform rather than in the chat section, as we may not see them there. Okay, let's get started. I am Scott Davis, Senior Vice President, Industry Engagement for ERIS, and we are pleased to host today's session, Repurposing Real Estate for Renewable Energy, Exploring Opportunities in Energy Transition and its impacts on land use and the commercial real estate sector is a fascinating and dynamic topic. We are very fortunate to have an experienced and knowledgeable panel of experts gathered today. So now I'd like to introduce Dan French, the founder and principal of DB Foresights, a global consultancy. Dan is also the founder of Brightfield Productions, the producer of Solar Farm Summit and the Virginia Solar Summit in Richmond. Dan will kick things off and then introduce the other panelists. Dan?
Thanks, Scott. Pleasure to be with you all today. Good to see so many folks plugged into this very timely topic. And I'm honored to be joined with co-panelists, or the panelists, because I'm really just a hype man. I'm going to try to start us off at a very high level before I pass it over to the real doers, Miss Annika Colston, founder and CEO of AC Power, one of the first real Brightfield redevelopers that we've had in this country, a real trailblazer, as well as Betsy Mason, Associate General Counsel at Catalyze, we're fortunate to have as an attorney, our resident legal eagle. And after I kind of blast through and set the tone, set the foundation, throw a lot of facts at you and some pretty pictures and maps, we're going to roll the sleeves up and try to, towards the end, answer your questions, which I know y'all have. So having said that, if I can try to share my screen, the right screen. Can y'all see that? All right. I hope you might have seen this before. This is from Visual Capitalist. It's 2023. We're coming on the fourth quarter, staring at 2024, and Mad Max is yet to arrive. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a terawatt in the queue. We're sliding up these beautiful sloping curves that you see here, the kind of graphs that we all remember from school. And here we are, whether we're talking about solar, wind, batteries, it's an electronic renaissance. It's a land use renaissance. It's a real estate renaissance, really across the board. There's another webinar today, probably about the medical renaissance. I don't have time to get into that, but find where we are on the chart. We keep beating the forecast to the upside. We're building things faster than we can. Manage 10 million open jobs in the United States. And I will say for all of our friends in Canada that most of my remarks today are focused on the U.S. The big news, of course, is the Inflation Reduction Act. I hope I'm not telling you about this. You're not hearing about it for the first time, because we're over a year on now, $700 billion, the biggest climate energy policy in U.S. history. Of course, it leverages many hundreds of billions and trillions more, but tax credits specifically purposed to accelerate clean energy policy kind of across the board. There's dozens of different features. We can't really get into all that today. Certainly not my purpose here, but I know you guys are the real professionals. You'll be following up. There's all kinds of updates forthcoming, but it's triggered tremendous investment. It's lining up with some of the other high-level objectives in Washington, including Justice 40, which is trying to more equitably distribute capital from the federal level across environmental justice communities, energy communities, 40% of all dollars. And then don't forget the bipartisan infrastructure law, which also snuck through somehow, the sausage making a couple of years ago. And it's all kind of going together to literally fuel, to provide the capital for all the work that we're seeing come to the ground. And we've been waiting for many generations, and finally Washington is flush again. So just in the last 12 months, this is a new report from our friends at American Clean Power, which I highly recommend, just last month, over $270 billion. Now over 83 new clean energy facilities Again, it's not just solar, it's not just wind, it's manufacturing, it's everything. And of course, this comes on top of the United States being the #1 country for foreign direct investment for over a decade on. And now we decide to boom. Particularly solar, we're catching up with the Chinese. There's geopolitical concerns there. I don't have time to talk about tariff and trade wars, but that's bipartisan. It goes back multiple administrations now. But let's take a look. There it is. So much activity. Again, it's not just one thing. It's, manufacturing up and down the value chain. For when I was a young brownfield attorney, now retired, that's why we have Betsy today. We were wondering, we have to work backwards from the end use. What is the demand? What are we going to do on this brownfield? Well, now we know there's all this new demand for sites. Here's batteries, its own mini revolution. And of course, here's solar, and this is already out of date, by the way. So it's on, and the federal government's throwing tremendous resources. If you're not aware of the interagency working group, the IWG, I highly recommend that you go to energycommunities.gov. It's a tremendous clearinghouse of information. You can track and link through all the agencies of government, find all these grants, all these new funding opportunities, details on the Inflation Reduction Tax Act credits, all those kinds of things, including the map. This is where you can go and search for the actual sites. So what qualifies for the new tax credits? Well, if you hit on this map, you qualify. There's many other ways, and you can see over on the left, some of the different ways that a site or a community can be qualified. Sometimes it's census tract, sometimes it's within a certain distance of a former coal facility, sometimes it's a brownfield, and we will get to that. But some of the big high points, direct pay for the first time. Uncle Sam's going to be cutting checks for tax exempt entities. This is brand new. And I mentioned before all the updates, be watching the IRS and Treasury Department websites. They've already issued guidance. I put some of them really just for breadcrumbs for those of you who are doing the footnotes and doing the real work. Treasury Notice 2329 back in April, and then they came right back in June to revise kind of this phase 1 question. Should it be contaminated or should it not be contaminated? As well as an FAQ for energy communities. So really beyond the scope of one webinar, roll your sleeves up and dive into this. Stay tuned for the real regs coming in the Federal Register. But having said that, for our purposes today, we are going to focus, of course, on redevelopment, on Brightfields. And the IRA has made brownfields mainstream now. Everybody wants to invest in brownfields because of the brownfield tax credit bonus adder, which is a mouthful, especially as I blast through quickly, but it's this 10%. It's real money eligible for projects in these energy communities, quote, as defined. I gave you some of the definition before. We're going to be talking about it, I'm sure, the rest of the hour. But energies include, I'm not going to read the brownfield definition. As a very smart audience, so I will skip that. You've heard it a million times, but it's the old brownfield definition that's carried on through. It includes certain things like mine-scarred lands, which in some brownfield programs might not qualify. And there are a long list of exclusions and exemptions. They kind of follow the 9 exemptions in the original brownfield law for all you old brownfielders. But generally, I've listed some down there at the bottom: petroleum sites, sites with PCBs, TSCA sites, MPL sites, sites basically where there's mandatory corrective action. But don't have time for that. Want to show you the money. I'm kind of the development guy, the investment guy, facilitating at a high level. And this is what it's all about. This is why people have asked me, what is a brownfield more times in the last year than in the 15 some years I've been doing this. Because there's a lot of new money that's trying to understand how to qualify for these tax credits because they stack, right? So this is 10% on top. Really a tremendous opportunity. And we've only got till the 2030s sometimes. So the clock is already ticking. The gun has already gone off. It's like the great land rush in Oklahoma. Again, America knows how to do this. And we do know how to do it. This isn't brand new. As Annika will tell you here in a little bit, brownfields to Brightfields has been around for a while. It was new maybe 15 years ago, but Uncle Sam got motivated then, started putting together some of these kind of key materials. There's lots of reasons. It's not just chasing the money. There's lots of reasons why we want to site clean energy projects on old brownfields. You can see this awesome graphic from Repowering America's Land, which you can find. There's the website, epa.gov/re-powering. It saves green space. It's already on the grid. All kinds of reasons. They're in environmental justice communities. And I just want to pop this slide up from our friends at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, who estimates, to hit our climate goals, the Biden climate goals by 2050, we're going to need about 10 million acres of land. And let's see if my animation will work, because you can see right next to the little solar grid there, 10 million acres. It's right about the amount of brownfield land that we have. Isn't that great? I've never been to a meeting where a lot of communities are starting to kill projects, even really good solar projects grazing with sheep instead of lawnmowers are getting killed. But I've never been in a meeting where people thought putting solar panels on a landfill was a bad idea. So just we're in the right place at the right time as brownfielders to kind of match up our precious land use resources. Also, would be remiss if I didn't shout out some more of the incredible work that EPA facilitates and funds. It's the TAB program, the Technical Assistance to Brownfields program. I can't dive into this. This is really just breadcrumbs for you to find later. But basically, EPA pays for someone to take your calls and questions about brownfields to brightfields in each region. Right, so regions 9 and 10 is the Center for Creative Land Recycling. KSU, Kansas State University, has a big chunk in the middle of the country, and they're literally professionals who can help get you started in this, answering your basic brownfield questions. But there's are now brightfield people associated with this program. So kind of no matter where you are, no matter what part of the country you're working in, there is kind of someone who can help answer your questions. Here's that awesome Repowering America's Land website again. Which started as kind of an EPA DOE thing and still serves as such. And you can see just all kinds of resources there. Highly encourage this, especially if you're just starting out. There's white papers. They just updated their map now. So energy communities is a layer on the Repowering America's Land website. There's a web-based trainer that you can go through, super helpful, especially if you're just starting out. And I just wanted to include this for you all to either follow now or refer back to later. They've got this project tracker too. And again, just making the case that this has been done, and brownfield's even longer. So it's a higher degree of sophistication. We need environmental consultants, we need attorneys, we need insurance, all these things that make brownfields go. But there's a lot of lessons learned. We're going to get to that later today. And according to EPA's tracker, 2.4 gigawatts of this stuff, clustering in places like Massachusetts, where they had really good state policy to help, especially back in the day. And here's kind of a breakdown. And Betsy's going to kind of pick up on community scale solar, but you can see most of these, like the universe of brownfields, they tend to be smaller. So 1 to 5 megawatts, 30, 35 acres or less. That has been the majority of repowering projects to date. But you can go find all that. That's me. I hope that's kind of a helpful primer and puts a lot of ideas maybe in your mind. Hopefully you've seen it. I know this is a very smart audience. And now what we're going to do, I'm just going to turn it over to Betsy first, and she's going to kind of make it real. As the practitioner, diving in, let me make sure I can stop sharing my screen. And then Annika, and then we're going to come back. I know I'm going to have some questions, and then we want to kind of respond. And it's an availability really of the experts that we have on the call, so we can maybe figure some things out together towards the balance of our time. So having said that, Miss Betsy Mason, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dan French. And speaking from one former retired brownfield attorney to another, even at EPA, I somehow managed to bring my current attorney life and my past attorney life together. I'm really delighted to be here today. So it has fallen to me to kind of run through the points that you probably were all attracted by when you signed up for this webinar. Sim, next slide, please. So in summary, as I said, these were our advertising points. So my job today is to basically run through the legal framework in a very general sense, a very broad overview of what are the legal things you need to pay attention to and be involved in when you're entering into a project like this. Secondly, a very, again, high level review of policy and financial incentives, and really they're sort of all of a piece, as something from Shakespeare would say. The policy is financial, the financial is the policy, and basically federal government, state government, even local governments are trying to find ways to get these projects built and to strongly encourage that. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the IRA today. because Dan did a great job of laying that out. But that is certainly kind of the first and foremost that project developers and investors are looking at now, especially that very helpful stacking of incentives slide that Dan showed. There are a lot of tax equity providers out there who are very happy to see all these additional ways now to essentially make money. And last but not least, and I think this is probably not an audience that I'm going to have to really get down into the weeds on, but why do you conduct environmental diligence on any project site? So it's going to be a slide you've all probably seen a million times before, but you can really stare at it and then we'll move on. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so these are really the basic legal considerations. I kind of break them down into transactional and regulatory / enforcement. So on a transactional level, what do I mean by that? The commercial agreements that will govern how your project goes, if it goes. So first, you want to have control of the project site that you want to be building on. What is a site control agreement? Essentially, it's just a real estate contract. Typically, most developers I've worked with, including Catalyze, where I am now, start with a lease option, and then they do their due diligence, environmental, otherwise, and then if it all works out, move on to the lease, and that's when things really start to pick up speed. Part of the reason for not entering into a lease right away is, and I'm sure this crowd is very attuned to this, but obviously you don't want to enter into a lease before you've performed your phase 1 environmental site assessment in accordance with circular regulations and the ASTM standard. But once you've got your site control in hand, then the other really important agreements are power purchase agreement or energy services agreement, which is more often used for storage, battery energy storage facilities as opposed to solar facilities. What is this? Well, okay, you're building the project in order to produce energy. Where's that energy going to go? To whom are you going to sell it? What is the market for it? So most often, both on the utility scale, big projects, and on a smaller scale, there will be an off-taker for the energy, and the power purchase agreement is usually a lengthy and complicated document that controls that, price setting. What happens if there's a quote-unquote force majeure event, an act of God that stops energy flow for some period of time, sort of everything addressed to the extent possible in the agreement. I will note, and pardon me, if any of you out there know me, you know that I don't sound like my usual self. I too was exposed to somebody with COVID this past week, and I'm not feeling so great myself. So bear with me. If I sound a little squeaky, that's why. Let's see. So energy sales. Community solar projects, which are typically smaller projects, for example, in Massachusetts, they're capped at 5 megawatts. Community solar projects don't have a power purchase agreement or an energy services agreement because there is no direct sale to an off-taker or set of off-takers. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the heck I mean by that in a slide or two, but just keep in mind that where you've got front of the meter project, or more often a behind the meter project, where you're actually building on somebody's rooftop and providing them with the energy, or at least some of the energy that you're generating from this facility, that's where you'll have a power purchase agreement. Interconnection agreement with the local utility is kind of often overlooked because it's something that just people always think of like the legal agreements, but obviously the interconnection agreement with your local utility is critical because unless you're behind the meter, that is on somebody's property providing them with the energy, you need to have a means of getting your energy out to the world. And the only way you do that is through the interconnection with the local utility. And so, I mean, it seems sort of self-evident, but there you go. And last but not least, for big ticket items, the EPC agreement, which is essentially the construction contract for the project. And I won't belabor this, but this too is often a lengthy and complicated document with, I guess, the sort of the primary bells and whistles are cost of the project, schedule for project milestones, and most often liquidated damages or some other form of punishment, if you will, for a contractor who's not meeting the project schedule. And often that's because you want to get the project online, but then there are also considerations relating to construction loan financing and tax equity financing, paying for the project, bringing money in, and if there are delays in the project construction schedule, there will be implications for your financing more often than not. So I'm going to try and speed along here. I think I'm going to take a little too much time. So those are the transactional considerations. The ones that perhaps this audience, which I understand is a lot of environmental consultants, yay, is probably very familiar with, siting and development requirements, by which I essentially mean sometimes state citing laws and regulations, but more often than not, you're just looking at local zoning and land use controls. So, do you need a special permit? Do you need to undergo site plan review? Perhaps you need a variance from the local zoning regulations to do what you actually want to do. And then the other big one is wetlands protection. Very often, like, for example, in Massachusetts, just about every project has to go before a conservation commission, which is a local body that administers both the state wetlands law and local regulations. So blasted through that. Next slide, please. And pardon me while I blow my nose. All right. Policy and financial incentive, as I said at the top, really, it's all of these are a matter of giving developers more encouragement in the form of financial remuneration, for the most part, to go out there and build these projects. Tax credits, again, basically the primary one for most developers these days has been and continues to be the investment tax credit under the federal tax code. But as Dan illustrated, there are, as a result of the IRA, many more incentives to be stacked on that formerly just 30% investment tax credit, and energy communities, brownfields, and we're seeing as guidance comes out from the IRS how this is actually going to play out. But tax credits are very important to, again, financing the construction of these facilities, because typically a solar developer is not going to have a real strong tax appetite for these credits. And what ends up happening, what really kind of drives the business, some would say, is developers will partner up with a tax equity provider, whether it's a bank or an investment fund, and one way or another, basically sell or partner with that tax equity provider so that that tax equity provider gets the full benefit of the tax credit. So you've got the financial folks looking for getting the tax credits themselves and putting money into the project. We could have a whole lengthy webinar about partnership transactions versus sale leaseback transactions. And if folks have questions about those, catch me at the end. But needless to say, it's big business, and it's what drives the solar development business in large part, at least from one angle. Next, renewable energy certificates, RECs. And you perhaps have heard of SRECs, solar renewable energy certificates. These are basically, they basically represent the environmental attributes that you would get from 1 megawatt hour of electricity generated by this facility. So, carbon emissions reductions, things like that. And there are state markets and state markets where these are traded, essentially. Net metering is basically essentially giving a facility off-taker the ability to sell back to the grid, to the local utility, excess energy produced by a system. If a lot of states do this now, although interestingly in the past, probably over the past year or so, there have been moves by some states to limit or get rid of net metering. Virtual PPAs, I'll kind of bloop over because they're very complicated, but that's more of a sort of an oil and gas style arrangement that involves, strike prices and complicated. We can talk more about it if folks want to towards the end. And then community solar. I think next slide, please. Yes, community solar. Community solar is mostly what I have done in my practice as a renewable energy attorney. As I mentioned, these projects are typically smaller and up to 5 acres. I'm sorry, 5 megawatts, and maybe up to 40 acres, give or take. Typically, you're not looking at this massive utility scale idea. So, what is community solar? Basically, think about it this way: you live in an apartment, and you would really like to put solar panels on your roof, but you can't because it's an apartment; it's not your building. So, what do? You go to a community solar project, and what that project is say a 5 megawatt solar facility that basically it's kind of like, imagine a triangular structure. You, the apartment renter, subscribe to the ability to buy renewable energy, not necessarily from that specific project, but just renewable energy. You pay your subscription fee, and at the same time, that solar facility is generating energy and putting it into the grid, and essentially you are buying a piece of the energy output from that solar facility, and you get that not in the form of cash, but as a credit that's applied to your bill. I'm not explaining that well, I think, because I actually don't feel as well as I thought, so I apologize, but this lays it out. Next slide, please. Yes, okay, so here's the sort of the stuff that we're all probably very familiar with. Why would you want to conduct environmental due diligence for a project? I won't really hammer hard on this because I think these are familiar points to everybody, but essentially Superfund law at both federal and state levels, very, very severe liability imposed on parties that arguably have anything to do with the site. Do you own it now? Do you own it in the past? Did you operate do some activity in the site now or in the past? Broad range, and essentially, as we discussed earlier, you want to be able to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment to see both whether you have an environmental issue there, and also to gain access to a sort of a safe harbor from liability that's provided under both the federal and state laws. Next slide, and I think that might be it. Okay, I will leave that there, and I apologize. My potential COVID apparently is catching up with me. I apologize.
No, you did well, Betsy. Thank you so much. And we'll just get Annika going. And I had one follow-up. I put RMI's logo on that map of EPA tab providers, and that's because they have a Brightfields accelerator that's super cool. And they're doing a lot of work on Brightfields. Ooh, I see Annika's slides, but I don't see Annika.
You don't see me?
There you are, and I can hear you too.
I do.
Oh,
Gotcha.
okay, great.
Awesome.
That's great.
Take it away, Annika. Yeah.
Great. So thank you, ERIS, and to my fellow co-panelists, Dan and Betsy. Very interesting information, and this is my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm the CEO and founder of AC Power. We are focused exclusively on developing solar projects on previously disturbed sites, namely landfills, quarries, mine sites, etc. And we are equally as excited as Dan about the infrastructure bill and the IRA and just sort of the confluence of all of these opportunities. And it gives them some pretty strong tailwinds. That said, there are still a lot of headwinds, and it's still difficult to develop projects. So I'm going to go through one example here for real life. This is the Global Sanitary Landfill in Old Bridge, New Jersey, and it's a Superfund site, so on the NPL. So I'll cut to just straight to one question, which is that this project, because it's on the NPL, does not qualify for the brownfield definition. So Dan, you can see the pretty picture of global. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to start with kind of the big picture timeline. We identified this site back in 2019 and really started our work then. And the project is currently under construction and should begin operation before November of 2023. So it's imminent. And so I am going to go through hang on. I need to figure out how to change. Oh, there it is. Okay. It's technology. You'd think I'd have it this many years past COVID. And whenever I don't get it, then I get like more freaked out. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to know. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. So I know how to develop a project. I don't necessarily know how to operate Zoom. So the site history, this is as I mentioned, a Superfund site. It originally operated as a solid waste municipal landfill in the 60s up until 1984. And in April of 1984, feels like it could have been this weekend on the eastern seaboard here, but they experienced heavy rainfall that triggered a catastrophic slope failure, which exposed waste, breached a perimeter dike. It was all around not a good scene. And the global landfill is surrounded by the Cheesequake State Park. So there was immediate concern that it was going to go into the groundwater and into the surrounding area. So the EPA and the New Jersey DEP conducted site evaluation. The investigations revealed these 63 buried drums. It was put onto the national priorities list in March of 1989, and it has remained on that list. The site completed its remediation in 2012. And so when we identified the site, it was partly because it was in the state of New Jersey, where the state program supports the development of solar on landfill sites. And that is an important criteria because these sites can generally be more expensive, time consuming, present more risks. And so you need to have state program. Generally, it's far easier if you have a state program that supports it. And as Dan mentioned, there can be a lot of backlash to some solar projects. Generally, solar on brownfields does not generate the same level of NIMBY, the not in my backyard, because there's already been this sort of social acceptance that this is contaminated property. It is already not in high regard and high use. Of course, there are some neighbors, some landfills are quite beautiful and they look like fields, and some people, do get upset. But generally, we find a lot of support for our projects. So we reached out to the, Betsy mentioned on one of her slides, the potentially responsible parties group. So this is a Superfund site that's managed by a PRP group. And that PRP group is made up of about, 50 to 75 companies, but there's a handful that are the real decision makers. So like 6 to 10, and they're represented by a lawyer, as probably most of you already know on this webinar. So we reached out to that person and said we were interested in pursuing the project for solar development. And he said, that sounds great, but you have 3 really big problems. And I said, okay, what are they? And he said, first of all, there's no clean title, because as we found, this is something that can go across the board for so many sites that we've looked at, particularly Superfund sites, is this was owned by some local businessman back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They have passed away, and their children are not answering the phone because they don't want to have any responsibility for this contaminated site. So the original site owner here was not part of the potentially responsible parties group. So the site has been in essentially owned by a defunct partnership for the last several decades. So that was issue number 1. There's no title. So again, as Betsy said, you need clear site control agreement. So the PRP group could say, an extremely important part of this project, they could say that they support this, but they couldn't enter into a lease agreement with us. The second issue was the liens. Because there was no owner that had been paying property taxes, there was about $3 million of liens from previous property taxes. So there was kind of issues within issues for that $3 million number, because it's a little bit of fiction, because the property taxes had never been reassessed since it was operating as a solid waste landfill. So the value wasn't accurate. And then on top of it, you have 18% compounding interest. So those liens were not ever really going to be paid by anybody. But in order to move forward, it still was something that needed to be addressed and resolved. The third point was access. And this is, again, something that we run into, kind of related to at least title reports. We have legal access issues on so many sites. And so again, my theory on this is that back in the 60s or 70s, these dumps needed to be sited, and it was like, oh, just go put them over there, and a road was built. And so for every site, I can physically get to the site, but I have no actual legal access. And there's been so many easements and different there may have been an easement for cleanup offered, but that easement can't be used for solar development. And so we've worked through these loopholes on many of our projects. So I took that call to be great news. I was like, wow, they're interested, and there's only 3 problems. We'll take it. So, we do hard things at AC Power. So we said, all right, let's look into that, because it is truly, a beautiful site. And so there's the access road where we didn't have legal access. And then you can see this is the Cheesequake State Park that's off in the distance. And so the development of this project was really dependent on these 3 factors: close work with the PRP group, who was willing to enter into cooperation agreements that would allow us to be partners on the site. I think one of the things that is incredibly important to AC Power is that we recognize that the remedy is the priority at all of these sites. Health and human safety is always the priority. So when we're developing a solar project, we're looking at how can this solar project complement what is the existing remedy at the site. And so we're always looking to ensure that the project the landfill stays in compliance, and the solar project can complement the efforts there. And so we relied heavily on this relationship with the PRP group. We also had an affiliate who agreed to take title to the underlying Superfund site. So that was an important consideration that never would have been able to go forward. So that took a lot of due diligence and legal work and contracts and insurance and hopefully replication, that we'll be able to do this kind of thing at multiple sites. And then lastly, the New Jersey Community Solar Pilot Program. So going back to the timeline briefly, and I will keep with my allotted time, so we have time for questions. But we identified the site in 2019. In 2020, we entered into the site control agreement. We conducted some of the due diligence and development with Old Bridge Township, with the New Jersey DEP, with the US EPA, with the planning board, and submitting to the New Jersey Community Solar Program in early 2021. That program is highly competitive. It is reopening with a new program in November of this year, and it has a different format. But previously, the pilot program was, a bit like winning, a beauty contest. So you had to have a project that scored the highest points. And so you were looking at adding a lot of additional services to your project. So we have workforce development with the local community college. We have over 50% of the subscribers, the end users who will purchase the electricity, are low and moderate income, and they're within Old Bridge Township and the adjoining community. So it's the most restrictive catchment area for subscribers. So there was a lot of additional costs that burdened this project further. And the only way that it was possible was because the New Jersey Community Solar Program offered a very attractive renewable energy credit, and the community solar subscription price, the residential rate, could support it. So those kind of things coming together allowed us to resolve the access issues, to work with the PRP group, and to take title. So the project was submitted to the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities for the Community Solar Program in early 2021. It was awarded in October of 2021. And as I mentioned, it needs to be operational in order to secure that incentive by November of 2023. So that timeline is actually incredibly aggressive, particularly, for brownfield projects, but also just because of the state of the market right now. So interconnection studies and delays are often outside of the hands of developers. So if we are not able to work with JCP&L, who is the local utility for this, to get them to give us a permission to operate it by November, then we could lose our incentive. And what that means is we could essentially be out, in this case, where your project is built, you are at a differential that can essentially make your project fully uneconomic. So you're taking away the incentive from the project. Also, with the cost to build a project and the timelines for equipment, it was extremely tricky at the beginning of this year when we were trying to secure the engineering, procurement, and construction contracts with the company that would build the project. And they were saying, if we go out and buy the transformer and the switchgear, we can have the project up and running, we guarantee, by January of 2024. We were like, well, that's 2 months, 3 months too late. So there was a lot of working together to figure out how to preserve this deadline. And I'm happy to report that as of this moment, JCP&L is 3 weeks early. So it's not over till it's over, but it's close. So I would just close this by saying, this is an incredibly challenging project that I'm incredibly proud of. It took a very big group of people, a lot of stakeholders that championed it. And I would like nothing more than to be able to replicate this nationwide. And I think there are dozens and hundreds probably of sites that are similar to it. And it is possible because of the additional funding, not brownfields funding, but other adders like the low and moderate income adder, or if the other portions of the energy communities, if you could get 40, 50% ITC on these sites, then many of them will be economic nationwide. And lastly, the state incentives are huge. Almost all states come around in the end to say, okay, well, we want to make sure that our disturbed sites get repurposed. But if they can make that clear from the beginning, and there are states that are doing it, Michigan, one of them, an early program is really highlighting these sites. That is, I think that's good for the whole market, because it sends the right message to the end users and the stakeholders, and they don't feel so scared that things are, you know, that their property is going to be taken over. So I don't know if I'm handing it over. I'll stop sharing.
No, thanks, Annika. That's awesome. We already have some questions coming in, so we're kind of moving into that phase. If you have a question, fire in the chat. I know I'm going to have some help. Mr. Davis is helping me with the questions, but I have some questions too. Thanks, Annika and Betsy. You know, it is difficult. I always make the brownfields are like a box of chocolates joke, which has always been true, but it's layers of sophistication on top of each other to actually do these things. There's a lot of moving targets. Annika, you mentioned interconnection. I mean, what is even up with that, right? Like, there's lots of projects stranded, lots of capital that's stranded, and lots of new money piling in. So even more important for this audience, the environmental consultants, they're the ones kind of translating, right? Like, how do you actually make all these gears fit together? But one specific question for you, Annika, about that site, or you can respond maybe to other sites, because I know you've been doing brownfields for a long time. Were there any corrective actions on the site, and is monitoring still required?
Yes, I was just going to reply to one of them in the Q&A itself, but yes, they are subject to 5-year plans under the EPA for the NPL site, and so I think they've completed 2 5-year reviews, and they are doing ongoing maintenance, and the remedy is complete. So now they're just in the testing and compliance stage.
Okay, awesome. And Betsy, I wanted to give you a chance to respond, because Annika had brought up, you know, a lot of legal issues, access and site control, liens, more of these kind of, you know, brownfield, you know, issues within issues. What are some of the kind of key pitfalls? I'm reflecting on everything that you've heard so far, you know, for this audience to be thinking about as they're trying to line up stack those old Gantt charts, you know, stacking all the project items, you know, on a timeline. How can we think about it maybe from a best practices perspective?
One thing that Annika brought up that I found fascinating, and kudos to you and your team, Annika, for solving that issue, title of the property. That is one of the driest, sorry to folks in the audience who may be title insurance folks, but driest, arguably dullest things out there, but so critical to every single project. As folks probably know, title to the land is who owns the land, and very often for a lot of different sites, but certainly for landfill sites and other sort of you know, sort of formerly unregulated activities such as dumping grounds and things like that, it really can be a spider's web of just complications. And one thing that you want to do is try to get on top of that as soon as you can, not only because it will be important for your site control agreement, locking down you know, the ability to actually build your project on that property, but as significantly, any construction loan lender or tax equity provider who's going to come in and take out that construction loan is very likely going to require not just you know, that you review title and know what's there, but a title commitment that is well, more importantly, a title insurance policy, whether for developer as the leasehold mortgagee or for the lender. And title insurance policies are, I've been wrestling one at a particular site that I'm working on right now. So that is something that has a much longer lead time than you would ever hope. And so always good to get on that early. Access is another interesting one. And I think to me, that really is tied into the title question, because if you don't have legal access to your project site, to the parcel, the actual legal tax parcel on which you're building, that's going to jam you up on a number of levels as well. So, yeah,
Awesome.
but
Thanks.
I'm impressed the way it sounds like you've managed it at that particular Superfund site.
Yeah, I like what Annika said about we do hard things. You know,
Yes.
it is hard, and you know, Annika doesn't pay me, but it takes, you know, real professionals. Like, you know, there are a lot of pitfalls, more than we can cover in this hour. Or I do whole conferences. I do whole Brightfield conferences. We can't cover it in 2 days. It really is like a box of chocolates. We've got a lot of questions. Keep them coming. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. I think maybe we have bonus minutes, but the mod gods will correct me on that. Annika, I love what you said. I think it rhymed. Was it remedy is the priority? And we've got Mr. Brian Walker asking specifically about how you work to convince regulators, PRP groups about not compromising the cap. You know, there's a lot of issues. Some of these landfills, you know, have specific issues. You can answer to the project you mentioned or any others. You know, what level of concern, what kind of community outreach you know, is required to get people comfortable with these types of schmutzy transactions?
Yeah, I think we target it from a few different directions. One is through engineering support. So we will hire, you know, third-party engineers. We will often work with the PRP group's engineers because they've already been working with them sometimes for 10 or 15 years. So they have the experience with the site, and we'll work with them to do, you know, geotechnical studies. We obviously do like stormwater management, but really looking at, you know, what are the risks, if any, about placing the solar, you know, gently placing the solar on top of the cap. And so we want to make sure that they feel comfortable from an engineering standpoint. And then we have the regulatory approach. So we're working with the state agency as well as with the EPA, and we have to get their approval. And so the EPA is reviewing all the way up until you have like 90% drawings, and they're giving quite a lot of back and forth and commentary on making sure that the design of the solar facility is going to complement the remedy in place. And there's also the contracting solution. So we have a very elaborate contract, and we try not to lay out kind of every scenario, but we know again that the remedy is the priority. If the EPA comes in and says that they need to conduct, you know, some tests in a certain area, or they need to access a portion of the landfill, that may compromise a portion of the solar facility. And while we hope that that is never the case, we do need to recognize that if the EPA or DEP, or if there is some reason to do it, that we have to allow it. And so how do we protect ourselves as a solar facility against issues? So it's a multi-pronged approach of sharing information.
Yeah, and ironically, you know, I think investors are getting more comfortable with brownfields and environmental risk. I've seen a real sea change, even maybe predating the IRA. There's not a lot of real brownfield buyers still, so to speak. There's some, but it's, you know, I see a lot of leases. But generally, if you have a sophisticated investor or fund, they can get comfortable with all these things. If you're working with someone like Annika who can actually check all the boxes, it's a higher quality of project, and a lot of there's growing concern about these single-use solar farms. Like most real estate booms, we went as fast as we could. We graded, right? A lot of land overgraded. There was a big federal judgment in May, federal grand jury in Georgia. There was a 1,000-acre solar farm washed out a neighboring property, 20 or 25 acres, kind of a trophy property, the way they had done some pond restoration. maybe 11 million or $12 million in actual damages, but the jury punished them $120 million of punitive damages on top. And so that's the big news, I think, this summer is from the top down. We can talk about ESG and other things, but I think investors are going to be demanding higher quality projects, whether it's greenfields or brownfields. And again, we're just in that sweet spot where brownfields have to be done right from the get-go. So that took me longer to explain than I'd hoped. But Betsy, let me give you an opportunity, because we didn't really start maybe from zero. And for some of the uninitiated, we've got a great question from another attorney, Maria Breeze, if I can find it. She was asking about how do we protect ourselves? Is it just a matter, starting from zero, we need a phase 1 environmental site assessment, go. I don't think we managed to sneak that in the hour quite yet.
No, actually we didn't. And I saw the question and kind of vaguely answered it in the Q&A section. Yes, I mean, you're going to have environmental liability both from potential government action and from other parties who may get tagged for cleanup costs, investigation costs. And the idea of doing a phase 1 environmental site assessment is that you are taking advantage of what I described as that safe harbor under, at least under the federal act and regulations, whereby you do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, you determine what's there. There are a number of other steps that you need to take, and also need to take in an ongoing steps, like make sure you don't further exacerbate any issues that may be at the site, things like that. And that if you check all of those boxes and continue to check the ongoing boxes, you will have some amount of protection from, at least in this instance, the federal government. But then there are also, third parties. Say you are a developer who has, put your arrays on top of a landfill, and groundwater from beneath the landfill is completely controlled by the pump and treat system, and a neighbor sues because, oh my gosh, they've got something TCA in their well. Now, there are all kinds of questions of causation here, and will a developer actually be tagged for liability for that? In the end, likely not, but at the beginning of these types of things, a plaintiff will sue anybody and everybody they possibly can. So to cut to the chase and to give the answer that I gave Maria, you typically want to have environmental indemnification provisions in your site control agreement, where you are aware that contamination may be an issue. So what does that mean? Well, essentially you get the property owner to agree to cover your expenses, either in the event of a federal or state agency coming after you for investigation or remediation costs, or in the event of a third-party claim for bodily injury, death, property damages. Also, and something that I didn't mention in my answer to Maria offline there, is environmental insurance, which is something that really kind of had a heyday maybe 10, 15 years ago. That the market has changed quite a bit over the past several years. And I'm not sure, and Annika, maybe you can let me know how often folks are really getting, pollution legal liability policies and things that at least, leading up to the big boom in 2009, people were just papering deals with all over the place. Aside from the safe harbor provided by the Superfund law, it's really contractual protections.
Thanks, Betsy. Great answer. I think we're out of time. I know we've got some questions stranded. I think we're going to get back to those. I think maybe Scott, are you going to come back in and help us land the plane?
Yep, we'll do. What we were just talking about, what Dan was talking about, we'll any questions that did not get answered, we'll try to get them to answer those later, and then send those out via a notice email or something like that, and there'll be a list of those answers for those questions. So hey, we appreciate it, guys. Great job, Dan. Thank you for running the show like that. We do appreciate it. But we are out of time. And to read more about energy transition, commercial real estate, environmental and property assessment, or see a full list of upcoming webinars and recordings from past webinars, please visit ERIS Info Hub on erisinfo.com. which contains curated articles, podcasts, and webinars on these topics. Also, this webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the ERIS website in the next few days. On behalf of ERIS and our audience, I'd like to give a big thank you to Dan, Betsy, and Annika for sharing their immense expertise and insights with us today. And to our audience, we want to thank you for your attention during this past hour. We look forward to hosting you at our next ERIS webinar on October 25th, Dry Cleaning Sites, Part 3, It's Time to Remediate, with Mike Marcone and Larry Schnapp. Registration is now open and we have dropped the link to register in the chat section. So be one of the first to sign up and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Future's bright, y'all.